The bottle shattered against Caspian's skull, sending amber liquid and glass cascading down his face like a baptism of shame. He didn't flinch. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow as he slowly turned to face the three men who'd cornered him outside Madame Celestine's tavern. "Fight back, you worthless dog." Brutus Grimwald spat, his meaty fists already bruised from the beating he'd delivered. "Or are you too much of a coward to defend yourself?" Caspian wiped the blood from his eye with trembling fingers. His body screamed in protest, ribs cracked, jaw swollen, left arm hanging useless at his side. Still, he remained silent, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond his tormentors. "Look at him," sneered Vex Blackthorn, circling like a vulture. "The mighty scholar can't even throw a punch. What kind of man lets himself be beaten like a cur?" The third attacker, Darius Ironhand, kicked dirt at Caspian's knees. "Yellow-bellied coward. No wonder your father disowned you." Through the tavern's grimy window, Caspian caught a glimpse of copper hair and concerned green eyes. Lyrelay Moonwhisper pressed her palm against the glass, her face twisted with anguish as she watched the assault. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and something passed between them in understanding. Promise. A love that transcended the violence unfolding in the alley. "Please," she mouthed, though whether she begged him to fight back or to endure, he couldn't tell. Caspian closed his eyes and remembered his mother's dying words, "Violence begets violence, my son. True strength lies in knowing when not to strike." He'd carried those words like a shield for 26 years, even as they branded him a coward in the eyes of his peers. Brutus grabbed Caspian by the collar, hauling him to his feet. "One last chance, bookworm. Fight me like a man, or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows you're nothing but a sniveling coward." Caspian's lips curved in the faintest smile. "I already am nothing in their eyes," he whispered. "Your words cannot wound what is already dead." The admission seemed to infuriate Brutus more than defiance would have. He drew back his fist for another blow, but a voice cut through the night like a silver blade. "That's enough." The relay stepped into the alley, her emerald dress rustling against the cobblestones. She was beautiful in the way that made men write poetry and wage wars. Cascading copper curls, eyes like jade fire, and a spirit that could tame dragons or topple kingdoms. "This doesn't concern you," which Vex snarled. "It concerns me when." Three grown men beat a defenseless scholar. "Senseless," she replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "What great warriors you must be." Darius laughed harshly. "Defenseless. He chooses to be defenseless. There's a difference." Lyrelay knelt beside Caspian, her fingers gentle as they traced the cuts on his face. "Choosing peace over violence isn't cowardice," she said softly. "It's wisdom." "Wisdom," scoffed. "Tell that to his dead father who died ashamed of his coward son." Something flickered in Caspian's eyes, a spark of pain quickly extinguished. Lyrelay saw it and felt her heart break a little more. She helped him to his feet, ignoring the jeers and taunts of the three men. "Come," she whispered. "Let me tend your wounds." As they walked away, Brutus called after them. "Mark my words, coward. One day your yellow belly will get someone you love killed. And when that day comes, remember that you could have been strong enough to stop it." Lyrelay's cottage sat at the edge of Willamere village like a jewel forgotten in tall grass. Moonlight streamed through diamond-paned windows as she guided Caspian to a chair beside her fireplace. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, gathering herbs and bandages, while he sat in brooding silence. "You don't have to do this," he murmured, wincing as she dabbed a cloth against his split lip. "They're right about me. I am a coward. Hush." Her fingers were gentle, but firm as they cleaned his wounds. "I've seen cowards, Caspian Nightingale. They run when faced with danger. You endure." He caught her wrist as she reached for another bandage. Enduring and courage aren't the same thing. A brave man would have fought back. A brave man would have defended his honor. What would that have accomplished? She pulled free and continued her ministrations. "Brutus is twice your size, Vex carries a blade, and Darius has fists like hammers. He would have been beaten far worse. Or killed. Perhaps that would have been preferable." The words hung between them like a curse. Liralay's hands stilled, and when she looked at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Don't say such things. Not to me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think I care so little for you that I'd rather have you dead and proud than alive and whole?" Caspian stared into the fire, watching flames dance across charred logs. "My father died believing his son was a coward. The whole village whispers behind my back. Children throw stones and call me names. Even now, 3 grown men can beat me senseless in the street and face no consequences because everyone believes I deserve it. I don't believe it. You're the only one." She finished bandaging his ribs, her touch lingering longer than necessary. "Then perhaps I'm the only one who matters." He turned to face her fully, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "Why, Liralay? Why do you care what happens to a coward like me?" Instead of answering, she traced the scar that ran along his jaw, a memento from another beating he'd refused to prevent. "Tell me about this one." "Tavern brawled 3 months ago. A drunk merchant was harassing a serving girl. I asked him to stop. He broke a chair over my face." "And you didn't fight back?" "No." "What happened to the girl?" Caspian's smile was slight but genuine. "She got away safely while he was busy beating me. That seemed more important than my pride." Liralay's heart clenched. She cupped his face in her hands, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. "You beautiful, infuriating fool, don't you see? That wasn't cowardice. That was sacrifice. The village doesn't see it that way. The village is blind." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his skin. "I see a man who chooses mercy over vengeance, protection over pride. I see someone who would rather suffer himself than cause suffering to others. Even when those others don't deserve his mercy, especially then." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them like unspoken words. Finally, Caspian reached up and covered her hands with his own.
"I love you,"
he said simply.
Elle.
"I have loved you since the day you defended me in the market square. When those children were throwing rotten fruit and calling me names, you stood between us and told them that cruelty was the only true cowardice." I remember her voice was thick with emotion. "You looked so surprised that someone would speak for you. I still am, every day." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and tasting of tears. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "Not to spite your gentleness, but because of it. In a world full of men who solve problems with fists and blades, you choose a different path. A coward's path. A healer's path. Like mine." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of storm. The trouble began on a market day when autumn painted the world in shades of gold and blood. Caspian walked beside Liralay through the crowded square, carrying her basket of herbs while she distributed remedies to those who couldn't afford the town physician's fees. Children who once mocked him now smiled shyly and accepted peppermint. Sweets from his pockets. "You're different," Liralay observed as they paused beside the fountain. Lighter somehow. "I've been sleeping better." He adjusted the strap of her herb satchel. Fewer nightmares about disappointing ghosts. She was about to respond when a commotion erupted near the blacksmith's forge. Voices rose in anger, metal rang against metal, and someone screamed. The crowd surged toward the disturbance like water flowing downhill. "Stay here," Caspian said. But Liralay was already pushing through the throng at the forge's center. Brutus Grimwald held young Kieran Ashworth by the throat. The boy barely 16, an apprentice to the blacksmith, dangled like a rag doll in the larger man's grip. His face was turning purple. "Thieving little rat," Brutus snarled. "Thought you could skim coins from my purse while I wasn't looking? I didn't. Please, ... Please, ... The blacksmith, Master Aldrich, stood frozen with a hammer in his hands. He was a kind man, but old. No match for Brutus, even if he'd had the courage to intervene. "Someone should do something," a woman whispered. "Not our business," her husband replied. Pulling her back, the crowd watched with the morbid fascination of spectators at a blood sport. Some even laid bets on how long the boy would last. Caspian felt Liralay's hand slip into his. "The boy's innocent," she breathed. "Look at his eyes. There's no guilt there, only terror. Caspian studied Kieran's face and saw truth in her words. The boy was scared, but not of being caught in a lie. He was scared of dying. "My purse is missing 2 silver pieces," Brutus announced to the crowd. "This little weasel was the only one close enough to take them." "I never touched your money," Kieran wheezed. "I swear it." "Liars deserve punishment." Brutus tightened his grip. The boy's struggles grew weaker. That's when Caspian noticed Vex Blackthorn slipping through the crowd toward the edge of the square. The man's pocket clinked with each step, the sound of silver coins shifting against each other. The real thief was escaping while an innocent boy died for his crime. "Brutus." Caspian's voice cut through the crowd's murmur like a blade through silk. Every head turned. Brutus loosened his grip just enough for Kieran to drag in a rattling breath. Well, the coward emerges from his hole." Brutus smiled like a wolf scenting blood. "Come to watch justice being done. Come to prevent an injustice." Caspian stepped forward, ignoring Liralay's restraining hand on his arm. "The boy didn't take your silver." "And how would you know that, bookworm?" "'Cause Vex Blackthorn did. Check his left pocket. You'll hear your coins singing against each other." The crowd turned as one to stare at Vex, who had frozen at the square's edge like a deer caught in torchlight. His hand moved instinctively to his pocket, and the telltale clink of silver echoed in the sudden silence. Brutus's face went through several interesting color changes. He released Kieran, who crumpled to the ground gasping, and turned his full attention to Caspian. "You dare accuse my friend of theft? I accuse the guilty party. Nothing more. Prove it." Caspian looked around the circle of faces, some curious, some skeptical, most simply eager for entertainment. "Vex," he called out, "empty your pockets. If I'm wrong, I'll submit to whatever punishment you deem fit. And if you're right," Brutus asked, "then you apologize to the boy and leave him be." Vex tried to run then, confirming his guilt more clearly than any confession could have. Darius Ironhand caught him 3 steps from the square and dragged him back, turning out his pockets to reveal not only Brutus's missing silver, but also a handful of trinkets clearly lifted from other market-goers. The crowd's mood shifted like wind before a storm. Suddenly Vex found himself facing the same murderous attention that had been focused on Kieran moments before. But Brutus wasn't finished. His humiliation needed an outlet, and Caspian had provided one. "Clever bookworm, very clever," he cracked, his knuckles with deliberate slowness. "But you've just made a powerful enemy. I've made an enemy of injustice. If that makes me your enemy as well, so be it." Liralay stepped up beside him, her chin raised in defiance. "He's not alone." Brutus laughed, but there was something ugly in the sound. How touching. The coward and his witch, standing against the world. "Standing for what's right," she corrected. "We'll see about that." Brutus gathered his men and pushed through the crowd, but not before leveling one last threat at Caspian. "This isn't over, bookworm." Not by half. As the crowd dispersed, young Kieran struggled to his feet and approached Caspian with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved my life." Caspian helped steady the boy, checking his throat for lasting damage. "Anyone with eyes could have seen you were innocent. I simply chose to look." But no one else spoke up. "Only you." Kieran's voice was hoarse but determined. "They call you a coward, but you're the bravest man I know." 3 days later, they came for Liralay. Caspian was in the village library, translating an ancient text about healing herbs, when young Myra, Whisperwind, burst through the doors with terror written across her face. "They took her," the girl sobbed. "They took Miss Liralay." The quill snapped in Caspian's fingers. Who took her?" "Brutus and his men, they said. They said she was a witch, that she'd cast spells on people to make them think you were brave." Instead of a coward, the world tilted sideways. Caspian gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Where did they take her?" "The old watchtower. They're holding a trial." Mira's voice dropped to a whisper. "They say if she's found guilty, they'll burn her." Caspian was already moving, sweeping scrolls and books aside as he searched for something. Anything that might help. His hands shook as he rifled through ancient texts, looking for laws that might protect her, precedents that might save her life. "If to hurry," Mira pleaded. "Half the village has gone to watch." "Oh." there, treating it like a festival. A festival, the word tasted like poison. They're going to murder an innocent woman, and they're treating it like entertainment. He found what he was looking for, a leather-bound tome containing the old laws of Willowmere. His finger traced down the pages until he found the relevant passage, according to ancient statute. Any accused which had the right to a champion, who could defend her honor through trial by combat. But who would stand as champion for a woman everyone believed had bewitched the village coward? The answer came to him with crystalline clarity, terrible and inevitable as winter. The watchtower stood on a hill, overlooking the village, its stone walls black with age and streaked with moss. A crowd had gathered in the courtyard, their faces lit by the orange glow of a bonfire that had been built for a very specific purpose. Caspian arrived to find Lyrley, bound to a post at the courtyard center. Her copper hair hung in tangles around her face, and her green dress was torn and dirty. But her eyes, her magnificent eyes, still blazed with defiance. Brutus stood before her like a judge pronouncing sentence. Lyrley Moonwhisper, you stand accused of witchcraft, casting dark spells to cloud men's minds and make them see cowardice as courage, weakness as strength. The only darkness here is in your heart, she replied, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, still defiant, still weaving your spells with honeyed words. Brutus turned to address the crowd. This woman has corrupted our village. She has made us doubt our own eyes, made us question what every man knows to be true, that Caspian Nightingale is a coward. Shouts of agreement rose from the assembled villagers. Caspian saw faces he recognized, shopkeepers who'd known him since childhood, neighbors who'd shared meals at his table, friends who'd once defended him against crueler tongues. Fear had transformed them all into strangers. The penalty for witchcraft is death by fire, Brutus continued, unless, he paused dramatically, unless someone steps forward to serve as her champion. Trial by combat, as is the old way. He looked directly at Caspian, standing at the crowd's edge. But who would be foolish enough to face me for the sake of a witch, who would throw his life away on such a hopeless cause? Felt the challenge hung in the air like smoke from the waiting pyre. Every eye in the courtyard turned to Caspian, waiting to see what the village coward would do. He thought of his mother's words about violence, begetting violence. He thought of his father's shame and disappointment. He thought of every beating he'd endured, every insult he'd swallowed, every time he'd chosen mercy over vengeance. Then he looked at Lyrley, beautiful, brave Lyrley, who'd seen something in him that no one else could see, and made his choice. I will. The two words fell into the courtyard's silence like stones into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the crowd. Someone laughed. Someone else cursed. A woman fainted. Caspian walked forward, the ancient law book tucked under his arm. Each step felt like walking through deep water, resistance building with every forward movement. I invoke the right of trial by combat, he announced, his voice steadier than he felt. I stand as Lyrley Moonwhisper's champion. Brutus stared at him in disbelief. You, the coward who won't even defend himself, the man who chooses when to fight. You'll die, bookworm. I'll crush you like an insect. Caspian met Lyrley's eyes across the firelit courtyard. She was crying not from fear for herself, but from terror for him. Her lips formed a single word. No. But it was too late for that. It had been too late from the moment they'd laid hands on her. Perhaps he told Brutus, but not without purpose. The combat circle was drawn in the courtyard dirt with the point of Darius's iron hand's blade, 20 paces across, marked with symbols that had been old when Caspian's grandfather was young. Ancient law demanded that both combatants fight until one yielded, fled, or died. Brutus stripped to the waist, his massive frame gleaming with sweat in the firelight. Scars crisscrossed his chest and arms, a map of violence that spoke of countless battles won. He chose a warhammer as his weapon, its iron head dark with rust and other stains. Caspian kept his simple scholar's robes. He's taken only a sword from the weapons rack. The blade felt foreign in his hands, heavier than the books he was accustomed to carrying. His knowledge of swordplay came entirely from ancient texts, theoretical rather than practical. Last chance to run, coward, Brutus called out, testing the weight of his hammer. I might let you live if you crawl away now and leave her to burn. Caspian shook his head. I think not. The crowd pressed close around the circle's edge, their faces hungry for blood. Some still wager on the outcome, though. The odds were laughably one-sided. Young Kieran Ashworth stood near the front, tears streaming down his face. Don't do this, he pleaded. You've saved me once. Let me save you now. I'll fight him instead. You're brave, lad. But this is my battle. Caspian's smile was gentle but final. Some things are worth dying for. Master Aldrich, the blacksmith, pushed through the crowd. Take my hammer instead, he urged. You've no skill with a blade, but a hammer's weight might serve you better. Thank you, but no, a sword will do. Caspian raised the weapon, surprised by how natural it felt once he'd found the proper grip. Perhaps there was something to be said for instinct after all. The village elder, Magistrate Cornelius Ravencrest, stepped forward to officiate. His voice carried the weight of centuries as he spoke the ritual words. Let this combat serve as judgment. Let the victor's cause be deemed just in the eyes of gods and men. Begin. He called and stepped quickly back. Brutus charged immediately, his warhammer whistling through the air in a vicious horizontal arc. Caspian dove aside, the weapon missing his skull by inches. He rolled, came up running, and tried to circle, away from his opponent's reach. Stand still and die like a man. Brutus roared, pursuing with surprising speed for such a large figure. The hammer came down again, an overhead strike that would have caved in Caspian's skull if it had connected. Instead, it struck sparks from the stone where he'd been standing. A heartbeat before. For several minutes, the fight continued in this pattern. Brutus attacking with devastating force, while Caspian evaded desperately. The scholar's superior speed and agility kept him alive, but he couldn't maintain such frantic movement indefinitely. Coward, someone shouted from the crowd. Fight back. But Caspian couldn't fight back effectively, every time he tried to close. Distance for a sword thrust, the hammer's reach drove him away again. He was already breathing hard, sweat stinging his eyes. While Brutus seemed barely winded, then the inevitable happened. Caspian's foot caught on loose stone, and he stumbled. Brutus's hammer caught him in the ribs, lifting him off his feet and sending him flying across the circle. He landed hard. Tasting blood, his sword clattering away across the stones, the crowd roared its approval as Brutus advanced for the killing blow. Any last words, bookworm? Caspian struggled to his hands and knees, ribs screaming in protest. Duh! His vision blurred, but he could still see Lirelei tied to her post, her face twisted with anguish. I love her, he gasped. That's all that matters. Brutus raised his hammer high above his head. Love won't save her when you're dead. She'll burn, and you'll have died for nothing. Oh. Caspian's voice was stronger now, fueled by something deeper than desperation. I'll have died for everything. The hammer began its descent, and Caspian moved. Not away this time, but forward. And up. His shoulder caught Brutus in the solar plexus, driving the breath from the larger man's lungs and spoiling his aim. The hammer struck stone inches from Caspian's head. Before Brutus could recover, Caspian's hands closed around his throat. Not to strangle, he lacked the strength for that, but to hold on as Brutus tried to throw him off. Get off me! Drove his elbow back into Caspian's face, breaking his nose in a spray of blood. Caspian held on. Another elbow strike, this one catching him in the temple. Stars exploded across his vision, but still he held on. The crowd was screaming now, sensing that something had changed. This wasn't the methodical execution they'd expected to witness. Brutus spun, trying to slam Caspian against the courtyard wall, but the scholar twisted away and rolled clear. When he came to his feet, his dropped sword was within reach. Impossible. Brutus panted, touching his throat where Caspian's fingers had left bruises. You can't. You're just a coward. ... I was never a coward. Caspian wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. I was just waiting for something worth fighting for. The transformation was visible to everyone in the courtyard. Where? Moments before had stood a Bookus scholar who flinched from violence. Now there was something else entirely, a man who had finally found his cause. Caspian's grip on the sword was different now, confident rather than tentative. His stance spoke of balance and purpose rather than fear. The crowd fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Brutus hefted his warhammer. Uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "What are you?" he breathed. "I'm the man who loves her." Caspian's voice carried a quiet intensity that somehow reached every corner of the courtyard. "I'm the man who will not let her die." This time when Brutus attacked, Caspian didn't run. He stepped into the hammer's arc, deflecting it with his blade while closing distance. His sword point found the gap between Brutus's ribs, sliding between bone to nick the lung beneath. Brutus gasped and staggered back, crimson spreading across his chest. "Lucky strike," he snarled, but there was less conviction in his voice now. Was it? Caspian advanced steadily, his blade weaving patterns that spoke of newfound skill, or perhaps skill that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Or have you simply never faced a man fighting for love rather than pride? The hammer came at him again, a desperate, wild swing that left Brutus overextended. Caspian ducked beneath it and opened a long cut along his opponent's sword arm. Blood flowed freely now, weakening Brutus's grip on his weapon. "This is impossible," Vex Blackthorn shouted from the crowd's edge. "He's just a coward. Dazed ever." "Fought anyone, perhaps?" called out young Kieran, his voice cracking with emotion. "We were wrong about what makes a man a coward." Master Aldrich nodded grimly. "I've seen warriors in battle. Fear makes some men run, makes others freeze. But love, ... double quotes." He shook his head in wonder. "Well, love makes a man dangerous." Brutus tried a different tactic, rushing forward to grapple rather than strike. His superior size and weight should have given him the advantage in close combat. But Caspian twisted away from the grab and brought his sword hilt down on Brutus's skull, opening a gash that sent blood streaming into the larger man's eyes. "Yield," Caspian said quietly. "This doesn't have to end in death." "Never." Brutus wiped blood from his eyes and raised his hammer again. "I'll crush you and then watch your witch burn." That was his mistake, threatening Lirelay again. Something cold and implacable settled over Caspian's features, and when he moved this time, it was with lethal precision. The sword took Brutus through the shoulder, severing muscle and tendon. The warhammer tumbled from nerveless fingers as the big man dropped to his knees. "I said yield," Caspian repeated, his blade at Brutus's throat. But Brutus had one last trick. His offhand closed around a dagger at his belt, a hidden weapon, against the rules of combat but effective nonetheless. He drove it up toward Caspian's heart. The scholar saw it coming and tried to twist away, but he was a fraction too slow. The dagger's point found its mark, sliding between ribs to puncture lung and heart both. Caspian's own blade completed its arc simultaneously, opening Brutus's throat in a spray of arterial blood. Both men fell together, their blood mingling on the courtyard stones. Caspian. Liralay's scream cut through the crowd's stunned silence. She strained against her bonds, desperate to reach him. He was still alive, barely. The dagger had found his heart but hadn't stopped it immediately. He had minutes, perhaps less. "Cut!" Her free, he gasped to the nearest villagers. The trial. Trial by combat. ... I won. Magistrate Ravencrest stepped forward, his face pale with shock. By ancient law, the champion's victory proves the accused innocent of all charges.
Release.
Her hands fumbled with ropes and knots. Lirelay broke free and ran to Caspian's side, cradling his head in her lap as crimson spread across his chest. "You fool," she sobbed. "My beautiful, brave fool. Why did you do this?" His smile was peaceful despite the pain. Had two, couldn't let it. "Them, ... hurt you, ... I'm safe now. We're both safe." He shook his head weakly. "Not both. The blade ... found its mark."
Ow.
His breathing was becoming labored, each word a struggle. But it was ... worth it. You're worth ... everything. Around them. The crowd began to kneel. One by one, starting with young Kieran and spreading outward like ripples in a pond. The villagers who had mocked Caspian as a coward now knelt before his dying form. "Forgive us," Kieran whispered. "We called you a coward, but we were the ones who lacked courage. You had the bravery to choose mercy over vengeance, peace over violence, until the moment when violence was the only way to protect what you loved." Master Aldrich's weathered face was streaked with tears. "We were blind. You showed us what true strength looks like." Lyrile felt Caspian's heartbeat growing weaker beneath her palm. Each breath was a battle he was slowly losing around them. The entire village had fallen silent, witnessing the final moments of a man they had never truly understood. "Don't leave me," she whispered, pressing her lips to his forehead. "Please don't leave me alone. Never, ... alone, ... He managed, his voice barely audible. "Every sunrise, yes, every flower that blooms, every act of kindness, ... I'll be there." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining one last time. "The children ... teach them. Violence isn't strength. Mercy isn't weakness. ... I will. I promise." His eyes growing dim but still full of love, fixed on her face. "My beautiful Lyrile, no regrets. Lived to love you. Died protecting you. ... Perfect life." The words came softer now, each one precious as a dying ember. Tell them a coward can become a hero. ... When he finds something worth ... fighting for." His chest rose one final time, then fell still. Caspian Nightingale, the scholar they had called a coward, died with a smile on his lips and love in his heart. The silence that followed was absolute, sacred. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then young Kieran began to sing a haunting melody that spoke of sacrifice and redemption. One by one, other voices joined in until the entire village was singing Caspian's soul to rest. When the song ended, Magistrate Ravencrest stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of official pronouncement. "Let it be recorded that Caspian Nightingale died a hero. Let his name be honored, his sacrifice remembered, and let it be carved in stone," added Master Aldrich, "that we were fools, called wisdom, cowardice, and mistook gentleness for weakness." In the days that followed, the story spread beyond Willowmere like wildfire. Bards sang of the scholar who had chosen peace until peace was no longer possible, who had died protecting the woman he loved from those who would destroy her out of ignorance and fear. Lyrile tended his grave daily, planting healing herbs around the headstone that bore a simple inscription. He lived gently, loved deeply, and died bravely, proving that the greatest courage lies in choosing when to fight. Village children who had once thrown stones and cruel words now brought flowers to his resting place. They listened with wide eyes as Lyrile told them stories of the man who had shown them that true strength came not from the ability to inflict harm, but from the wisdom to know when harm was necessary. Years passed, and the legend grew. Travelers came from distant lands to visit the grave of Caspian Nightingale, the gentle warrior, the peaceful knight, the man who had taught a world that heroism could wear many faces. Lyrile never married again, though many suitors sought her hand. She dedicated her life to healing and teaching, carrying forward Caspian's message of mercy and understanding. Her cottage became a sanctuary where the wounded could find peace and the lost could find direction. On quiet evenings, she would sit by his grave and speak to him as if he were still there, telling him about the children who now chose words over fists, about the young men who had learned that protecting others was more important than protecting pride. "You would be proud," she whispered to the wind one autumn evening, 20 years after his death. "The village has changed. They name their sons after you now, little Caspians who are taught that gentleness is a virtue, not a weakness." A warm breeze stirred the herbs around his grave, carrying with it the scent of healing mint and lavender. Lyrile smiled through her tears, feeling his presence as surely as if he stood beside her. "I kept my promise, my love. I taught them that. A coward can become a hero when he finds something worth fighting for. But more than that, I taught them that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is choose not to fight at all. In the distance, church bells rang the evening hour, and children's laughter echoed from the village square. It was the sound of a community that had learned the difference between strength and cruelty, between courage and violence. Caspian Nightingale had given his life for love, but in doing so, he had given his people something even more precious: the wisdom to live without fear, to love without condition, and to understand that true heroism sometimes wore the face of a man they had once called a coward. As Lirelei rose to return home, she pressed a kiss to her fingertips and touched it to his headstone. "Until we meet again, my gentle warrior." Till we meet again. The legend lived on, passed from generation to generation. The story of a scholar who chose peace over violence, mercy over vengeance, and love over life itself. They called him a coward for not fighting, until he defended her with his last breath and proved that the greatest battles are fought not with swords, but with the courage to love completely, protect fiercely, and die knowing that some things are worth every sacrifice in the end. Caspian Nightingale became what he had always been, but the world had been too blind to see, not a coward, but the bravest man any of them had ever known.